Everybody, welcome back. My name is F. Dan Rivera. Today is the 9th of June 2018, and here I am once again talking about mass shootings prevention. How do we prevent? How do we prevent mental illness? How do we prevent uh, violent outbreaks? How do we prevent, honestly, how do we prevent all the sicknesses, all the bad things that happen in our lives, and at least how do we try to minimize the the bad relationships that we're having, and which is the most important of all the relationships is the relationship that we have with ourselves. How do you feel about yourself? You know, I want to be honest and just be frank and candid and open. To be quite honest with you, I come from a background where we had a lot of issues with our families, very dysfunctional, as I've already stated in some of the earlier videos, and some of the results of having a dysfunctional family are sometimes addictions. And I've suffered with addiction most of my life, and I've never known why. Most of my life I just went living it and living it and not really understanding what was happening in my life and really how to be able to control it. And what I've discovered, and one of the main things that I want to share with you, is that people with low self-esteem are more likely to suffer from an addiction. And I want to share something with you that I read and I fell upon a couple of years back. And it was a book by Dr. Nathaniel Brandon of the 6 Pillars of Self-esteem. And I'm going to read to you this just so you could get a small glimpse of understanding of how much the self-esteem plays into the development of our minds, of our families, and just about everything that has to do with the human being really affects the self-esteem. So here's what we're talking about. He says, quote, "Apart from the disturbances whose roots are biological, I cannot think of a single psychological problem, from anxiety to depression, to underachievement at work or at school, to fear of intimacy, happiness, or success, to alcohol or drug abuse, to spouse battering or child molestation, to codependency and sexual disorders, to passive and chronic aimlessness, to suicide and crimes of violence, that is not traceable, at least in part, to the problem of deficient self-esteem. Of all the judgments we pass in life, none is as important as the one we pass on ourselves." End quote. That's from Nathaniel Brandon, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. About 5 or 6 years ago, my wife started to tell me, she says, Dan, you have low self-esteem. Did you know that? And, when somebody tells you have low self-esteem, the first automatic response is to say, not me, it's you, right? I mean, so many of us love to blame other people for our own personal problems, and we do that as a self-defense mechanism that's really built into us, at least for those who are aware of it. And she would often tell me, a lot of the addictions and a lot of the bad habits that you have are really a sign of your low self-esteem. And for years, she told me this. And finally, I ended up picking up the book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. And that's when I discovered for myself that most of the problems that I was having was really as a result of self-esteem. Again, I'm not a doctor, but go and read for yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. If we're having children who are having issues, just like the way I was having, right? And some of the symptoms for me was that I was very defensive. I would also belittle my wife and the people around me. I would, resort to drugs and alcohol, and it was just a myriad of side effects, and they all were directly rooted in my self-esteem. And if we talk about self-esteem, self-esteem is really how you feel about yourself. We have two different things: a self-esteem and a self-image. Self-image is another important topic that we will be covering, not today, but self-image is how you view yourself. Self-esteem is how you see yourself, your self-respect, your self-love. How much do you love yourself? And if we were to think about somebody who's addicted to drugs, you can quickly see that they're suffering from a self-esteem issue, because the very act of doing drugs is evidence that they do not love themselves, because everybody knows that drugs doesn't have a good end. Can we agree? I mean, is there anybody out there of you who still believe, drugs are for my best interest? I mean, can you really say that to yourself? Anybody? Even you who, and there's probably one of you out there who takes medications and says, well, I need it because of, and I'm going to fight to convince myself that I need it. Okay, if you want to continue to believe that, fine. I'm not even going to argue. All right, then this video is not for you. Okay, but for those of you who are responsible and who want to move your families forward, then let's just come into that agreement. Drugs are not in our best interest. And so when we're talking about the self-esteem, the self-esteem is really the first pillar to a healthy lifestyle. If you want to have better mental health, it's going to come with a healthy self-esteem. And that entails self-confidence, self-respect, self-responsibility, and also it's a self-awareness of how we feel now, opposed to how much better we can feel if we were to work and develop our own minds, right? Our skills, our assertiveness, our level of assertiveness. I mean, just let me put this in a little bit of context. People that are not assertive sometimes struggle with expression, right? It's kind of hard to believe in something that you're not convinced about, and it's hard to be assertive about something that you're not convinced with, right? And I don't want to go too much into detail, but that's really what we're talking about. There was such a learning thing. And let me go back to the story. So when my wife was telling me, Dan, you have low self-esteem. That's why you do so many of the things that you do. And for years I said, no, 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 no. And finally, one day I went to my office and my office manager, and I said, you know what? I just read a book. It's called The 6 Pillars. And guess what? I have low self-esteem. My wife was right all along. And I'll be honest with you guys, my self-esteem has improved a lot, but there's always more room for improvement, because I still get defensive at times. But if we want to prevent mental illness, the first part of this is to realize that we have to improve the self-esteem of those who are falling into depressions. That we have to, the statistics come out that 85% of the population has low self-esteem. We all learn from our parents. For example, I asked one of my friends, I said, did you know that you learn how to put your pants on from your parents? And he's like, no. I said, okay, when you put your pants on, what leg do you put on first? Your right or your left? And he says, well, I use both legs. I said, okay, tomorrow morning, go home and just take note how you normally just put it on. And for many of us, at least in my case, I always put my left pant on first. Always. Now, there's circumstances when I don't, when I'll do it in a different way. But I put my left leg on. And one of my mentors, Paul Martinelli, he told me, he said, this is how you learn how to put your pair of pants on. He said, when your mom was a child and she was dressing you, she held those little tiny little cute little pants. You know, those cute little small ones, when I was a cute baby, right? I hope I was a cute baby at some point. I've seen the pictures. Not all the pictures were that great. But my mom said, put your leg in here. And when I tried to put my right leg in, she said, not that one. I already have it, the other leg. And so that became my left leg. And every morning I put on my pants, I always stick my left leg in first. My point is that everything that we learn, everything that we do, we learn by modeling. Our learning model. Our parents are learning models. They model and we learn as a result of what they model. Imagine that a mother who had low self-esteem, or a father, it doesn't even matter. What are they more likely to model to their children? Do you think a parent with low self-esteem is going to model high self-esteem? Or do you think they're going to model? Now, what people say and what people do are two different things. And I like what Stephen Covey says, to say, to know and not to do is really not to know. That's Covey. So what I'm saying is that we can be telling our children, hey, believe in yourself, feel good about yourself, feel this and that. But if we model low self-esteem, whatever that may be, then that's exactly what our kids are going to learn. It's like me having, chugging down a couple of beers and then telling my kids, hey, don't drink. And then when they're 18 and I find them drinking and I'm shocked, right? We learn everything through modeling. And if 85% of the population has low self-esteem, and low self-esteem leads to, let me read this again, to anxiety, depression, to some part, underachievement at school or at work, fear of intimacy, happiness or success, to alcohol and drug abuse, spouse battering, child molestation, codependency, sexual disorders, chronic aimlessness, which means that you go and you waste your life completely away, to suicide and crimes of violence, that all are a part and are partly directed by the self-esteem. So if this parent models low self-esteem, what do you think is going to be the end result in a child or a teenager who then will grow up to be an adult who will then again model low self-esteem to his children? I put a post on Facebook just the other day and I said, hey, can we all work together? I was attacked and belittled again and again and again because this is a typical response from, well, okay, I'll take that back. Not typical. There are some parents out there who want to make the difference in their lives. But I always get one person, so I completely take that back. There was one person who was like, you're like the epitome of, of such and such, you're the worst. And it's people like you why we have mass shooters. I mean, I'm blaming me. I'm trying to help people out, but I'm being blamed. That's fine. But my point is that person is closed-minded. At this point, they're like, I don't care what you say. I'm never going to learn a thing from Dan because he's a freaking this or that. What is that person's child going to learn? I have a neighbor nearby here. Their daughter comes over here quite often to my home. She plays with my daughter. And, this girl is in a depression. She's 17 years old, depression. And I know when people are cutters, you guys have heard of, cutters, and I'm not sure how it all plays out, but she's a cutter. She's in a depression. I've offered advice, but when she goes home, her father, who doesn't like me, and I'm lovable, man. I love everybody. I mean, I honestly, I can't even believe how somebody wouldn't even love me. All I ever try to do is help. But whatever. As lovable as I am, this guy is like, Dan thinks he's too much. He thinks he's amazing, but he's not. And he discourages his daughter from taking advice or even suggestions. And all the suggestions that we do are in her best interest. But he models pride. That's exactly what he models. He models pride. What is the likelihood that she's going to become a prideful person? And if you and I both know prideful people cannot take advice. Can we agree? So you can lead a horse to water, but the prideful horse will not drink. Now, I know all of you guys, I know you, whoever you're listening, you, the person listening, I know you're not prideful. But the guy to your right, now don't tell him that I said, but the guy to the right, that guy, he's prideful. He'll never take any advice. You're different. But pride is a sign of low self-esteem. And if you have a child that you're having a little bit of issues or you're butting heads with, butting heads is many signs of pride, right? So if you want your child to stop being prideful, then what do you as a parent, what's recommended that you do? That you stop being prideful so that they can stop being prideful, so that you can finally do what? Work together. My tip for you, ladies and gentlemen, today is let us consider that the self-esteem is damaged and that we need to rebuild the self-esteem if we want to help our children improve their mental health. I am your host once again. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this and you're taking anything good and you can see the value for improving your family's lives, please share this and support me as I begin this journey of helping people prevent mental illness. And I'm not gonna say I'm a father against anything, because I don't believe that we should be against anything. We should always fight or stand for, not fight against. We need to stand for. Anyways, I'm your host, F. Dan Rivera. Thank you so much for joining. I hope to see you next time.